You know, sometimes the hardest stories to tell are the ones that hide behind the closed doors of what looks like a perfect home. From the outside, people think everything is fine, but inside, your world feels like it's falling apart. And today, I want to tell you my story. If you're watching this video, kindly subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. My name is Margaret, and for years I thought my life was normal. I thought my marriage was normal. I thought my family was normal. I convinced myself that every argument was just a part of married life, every silent night was just a phase, and every tear I cried alone was just my own weakness. But deep inside, I knew something wasn't right. I married Daniel when I was very young. He was charming, confident, and he seemed like the kind of man who would protect me from the world. At least that's what I wanted to believe. In the early days, he was attentive and sweet, the kind of man who opened doors for me and made promises of forever. But slowly, the sweetness faded. Slowly, the love turned into control, and the warmth turned into anger. At first, it was small things. He would criticize the way I dressed, or the way I spoke, or how I handled simple things at home. Then it grew into something darker. His words cut deeper. His temper grew stronger. And before I realized it, I was walking on eggshells every single day, just to keep the peace. I stopped laughing too loud, I stopped meeting my friends. I even stopped looking in the mirror, because all I could see was the broken woman he made me believe I was. But life has a way of moving forward even when you're stuck. We had children. And they became my reason to endure. I told myself I had to stay strong for them. That's what mothers do, right? They sacrifice. They hold on, even when it hurts. I thought if I endured the storms, my children would at least have both parents. I thought if I just stayed quiet, things would eventually get better. But instead of getting better, the silence made things worse. Daniel began treating me like I was invisible. Weeks would pass with barely a word. Sometimes he would explode in anger over the smallest mistake. And the worst part wasn't even the shouting, it was the way he made me feel like I didn't matter at all. For years, I lived like this. I told myself it was normal, that every family had problems. But when you cry yourself to sleep more nights than you can count, you start to realize, this isn't love. This isn't what marriage is supposed to be. One evening, I remember sitting at the edge of my bed, staring at the dark ceiling, feeling the weight of silence pressing down on me. My children were asleep, and Daniel was in the living room, watching TV, as if I didn't exist. That night, I thought about my life. About the girl I used to be, the girl who laughed freely, who dreamed about love, who believed in happiness. Where had she gone? I wanted to find her again. That thought became the small flame inside me. A flame that whispered, you deserve more. You deserve to live. But breaking free wasn't as easy as just walking away. Fear held me back. Fear of what people would say. Fear of what would happen to my children. Fear of facing the unknown. For so long, I had been made to believe that I was nothing without him. That no one would ever want me. That I couldn't survive on my own. But deep down, a stronger voice started to rise. A voice that told me I had already survived so much, that maybe, just maybe, I could survive even more. The turning point came one afternoon, when I overheard my daughter playing with her dolls. She was imitating the way Daniel spoke to me. Her little doll was yelling at the other, calling it names, belittling it. My heart stopped. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. My children were learning what love looked like from us. And if I stayed, they would grow up thinking that abuse was normal. That silence was love. That pain was marriage. I couldn't let that happen. That day, something shifted inside me. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for them. For their future. For the chance to show them that love should be kind, that marriage should be safe, and that no one should ever make you feel small. It wasn't an overnight decision. I spent weeks, months even, quietly building the courage to leave. I started saving small amounts of money in secret, hiding it where he wouldn't find it. I began to reach out, little by little, to people I had cut off years ago. A childhood friend. A cousin. Even my neighbor, who had always sensed something was wrong, but never pushed me to talk. I started creating a lifeline for myself. And slowly, I began to imagine a life without him. A life where I could breathe. A life where I could smile again. But Daniel wasn't blind. He sensed the change. He noticed when I began standing a little taller, when I stopped apologizing so quickly, when I dared to look him in the eyes again. His anger grew sharper. His words became harsher. It was as if he knew he was losing control, and he hated it. One night, he cornered me in the kitchen. His eyes burned with suspicion as he demanded, "What's going on with you? Who have you been talking to?" My heart raced, but for the first time, I didn't cower. I looked straight at him and said, "I'm tired of being your shadow." For a moment, he was silent, almost stunned. Then he laughed, a cold, cruel laugh that echoed in the empty room. "You'll never leave me," he said. "You can't survive without me." But what he didn't know was that I already had. Every day I endured, every tear I shed, every quiet moment of strength, I had been surviving all along. And now, I was ready to live. That was the night I made the final decision. I didn't know exactly how or when, but I knew I was going to leave. Not just for me, but for my children. For the girl I used to be. For the woman I wanted to become. And so began. The morning after I made that decision, I woke up with a strange mix of fear and hope. Fear, because I knew Daniel would never let go easily. Hope, because for the first time in years, I saw a future that didn't end with me trapped in his shadow. I began planning quietly. Every day, while Daniel was at work, I would take small steps. I gathered important documents, birth certificates, passports, bank papers, and hid them inside an old showbox beneath my daughter's bed. I told myself if he ever found them, I would make up an excuse. But my heart pounded each time I touched those papers, as if even the sound of the folder opening could give me away. Money was another challenge. Daniel controlled everything, right down to the smallest grocery bill. But sometimes, when I shopped for food, I would ask for change in cash and slip a few bills into my pocket. Slowly, painfully slowly, I built a secret fund. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And with each note I tucked away, I felt a little stronger. There were nights when I almost gave up. Nights when Daniel's cold silence felt unbearable, when his anger boiled into cruel words that left me shaking. But then I would hear my children sleeping softly in the next room, and I would remember why I couldn't stop. They were my reason. My anchor. My courage. One afternoon, while folding laundry, my neighbor Sarah knocked on the door. She was kind, the type of woman who always smiled at everyone. I used to avoid her because Daniel hated when I spoke to others, but that day, something inside me wanted to open the door. She asked if everything was all right. For a moment, I wanted to lie, to say yes, the way I always did. But instead, I whispered, no. It was the first time I had admitted it out loud. And once the words escaped, tears followed. Sarah listened quietly as I told her pieces of the truth, not everything, but enough for her to understand. She didn't judge me. She didn't pity me. She simply held my hand and said, "When you're ready, you won't be alone." Her words were like oxygen. For years, I had felt isolated, convinced that no one would stand by me. But in that moment, I realized I wasn't as alone as Daniel had made me believe. Weeks turned into months. I grew bolder in my small acts of defiance. I started applying for part-time work without telling Daniel. A local cafe hired me to help with cleaning in the evenings. It wasn't glamorous, but it gave me a tiny income, something of my own. I told Daniel I was helping a friend with errands, and he didn't question it much. Every dollar I earned went into my hidden stash. Every day at the cafe, I felt a little bit freer. The smell of coffee, the sound of people laughing, even the simple act of someone saying thank you, it reminded me that there was a world beyond my cage. But freedom always comes with risk. One evening, I returned home later than usual. Daniel was waiting. His eyes narrowed as he asked where I had been. My heart raced, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I lost track of time," I said, pretending to be tired. His stare burned into me, but after a long silence, he turned away. That night, I barely slept. I knew my time was running short. If he discovered my secret, everything I had built would collapse. Then came the moment I will never forget. It was a Saturday morning, and Daniel was unusually quiet. He sat at the table with a cup of coffee, staring at me with an expression I couldn't read. Finally, he said, "You've changed." My throat tightened. I wanted to deny it, but something inside me refused to cower. "Maybe I have," I answered softly. He leaned forward, his voice low and sharp. "Don't forget who you are. Don't forget you belong here." But the truth was, I no longer belonged there. I no longer belonged to his anger, his silence, his control. And in that moment, I knew, if I didn't leave soon, I might never leave at all. So I set a date. I told myself, next Friday. By then, I would have just enough money, just enough courage. I would take the children while Daniel was at work, and we would disappear. The days leading up to Friday were a blur of fear and determination. I packed a small bag for each child, hidden inside the showbox. I rehearsed what I would say to them, how I would make it seem like an adventure instead of an escape. I arranged with Sarah that she would drive us to the bus station. From there, we would go to my cousin's house in another city. When Friday finally arrived, my hands shook as I prepared breakfast. Daniel left for work as usual, but I couldn't breathe until I heard his car disappear down the street. Then, quickly, I called the children into the living room. The morning after our escape felt unreal. For years, I had dreamed of waking up without Daniel's shadow hovering over me, but now that it had actually happened, the freedom felt almost frightening. My cousin's house was quiet, filled with sunlight streaming through lace curtains, but I couldn't shake the feeling that at any moment the door would burst open and Daniel would storm inside. I walked through the small living room, my heart racing with every creak of the floorboards. My cousin, Emily, made breakfast for the children, her voice soft and reassuring as she distracted them with stories about her garden and the stray cats that sometimes wandered into her yard. I watched them laugh, their little shoulders relaxed, and I realized just how heavy their lives had been under Daniel's roof. They were only children, yet they had lived with tension that even grown adults struggle to bear. But the fear never left me. I kept my phone switched off, terrified that Daniel was trying to call. Each time the neighbor's car pulled into the driveway, I jumped. Each time a shadow passed by the window, my stomach twisted with dread. I had left, yes, but would he let me go? The first week was the hardest. I barely slept. At night, I sat awake on the couch, listening for footsteps, for engines, for any sign that he had found us. Emily reminded me again and again, "You're safe here. He doesn't know where you are." But my mind replayed his voice, his threats, the way he had told me I couldn't survive without him. And yet, somehow, I was surviving. I had to start over in every possible way. I had no job, no steady income, no plan beyond these four walls. Emily offered her support, but I couldn't rely on her forever. I needed, to stand on my own. So I began the process of rebuilding. The first step was applying for work. My cafe job had been left behind, but I carried with me the courage it had given me. Emily helped me search local ads, and I nervously went for interviews, carrying my children with me when there was no one else to watch them. Some employers looked at me with pity, others with doubt. But finally, a small bakery offered me a position. It wasn't much, long hours, low pay, but it was a beginning. The first paycheck I held in my hands felt like gold. It wasn't the money itself, it was what it represented. Independence. Proof that I could provide for my children without Daniel. Proof that his words, that I was nothing without him, had been lies. But starting over wasn't just about money. It was about healing, too. The children struggled in their own ways. My daughter, the one who used to imitate Daniel's anger with her dolls, had sudden outbursts of fear. If I raised my voice even slightly, she would flinch. My son, usually cheerful, grew quiet and withdrawn at times, as though afraid that any happiness he showed would be taken away. I realized then that leaving Daniel was only the first step. The harder journey was teaching my children, and myself, what safety and love really meant. At night, we began a ritual. After dinner, we would sit together in a circle, and I would ask them to share one thing that made them happy that day. At first, they struggled. They weren't used to focusing on joy. But slowly, the answers came. Playing outside. Drawing. Helping Aunt Emily water the plants. Small things, but powerful. And each night, I would whisper to them, "You are safe. You are loved. No one will hurt you here." I said it as much for myself as for them. But Daniel wasn't gone. Not truly. 2 weeks after we left, Emily came into the kitchen holding her phone, her face pale. "Margaret," she said softly. "He called me." My stomach dropped. "He knows you're gone," she continued. "He's asking questions." He sounded angry. Of course he was angry. Daniel's control had been his power, and I had stolen it away. But I couldn't let fear drag me back. For the first time, I thought about something I had never dared to before, legal protection. With Emily's help, I went to a local women's center. They listened to my story and helped me file for a restraining order. The process was terrifying, sitting in an office, recounting years of silence and cruelty, handing over pieces of myself as evidence. But the women there didn't look at me with judgment. They looked at me with strength, as though they could see a version of me I hadn't yet become. When the restraining order was approved, I felt a rush of relief. It didn't erase the fear, but it gave me a shield. For the first time, the law was on my side. Still, Daniel tried. He left voicemails, filled with anger and manipulation. Promises to change, threats of what he'd do if I didn't return, accusations that I was tearing the family apart. I didn't listen to all of them. I couldn't. Each word was like a chain trying to pull me back. But instead of answering, I pressed delete. Again and again. With every message erased, I felt a little freer. Meanwhile, life slowly began to take shape. The bakery became more than just a job, it became a place of belonging. The smell of fresh bread in the mornings, the warmth of ovens, the rhythm of routine, it grounded me. My co-workers treated me with kindness, asking nothing of my past, only seeing the woman who showed up every day ready to work. The children started school. I'll never forget the first morning I dropped them off. They clung to me nervously, their eyes wide with fear of the unknown. But when I picked them up later, they were smiling, holding drawings in their hands. "Mommy, I made a friend," my son exclaimed. That simple sentence nearly broke me in the best way possible. Healing wasn't quick. Some nights, memories of Daniel's cruelty kept me awake. Some days, the weight of responsibility threatened to crush me. But alongside the fear, something else was growing. Resilience. I was no longer the woman who sat in silence, convinced she had no choice. I was no longer the wife who lived in her husband's shadow. I was a mother carving a new path, one step at a time. And then, one evening, something happened that showed me just how far we had come. We were sitting around the dinner table, finishing our meal, when my daughter looked at me with a curious expression. "Mom," she said softly, "are you happy now?" The question caught me off guard. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. But then I realized the truth. "Yes," I said, tears filling my eyes. "I'm happy. Not because everything is easy, but because we are free." She smiled, a small but genuine smile, and in that moment, I knew she believed me. Freedom didn't mean the journey was over. It meant the journey had just begun. And though Daniel's shadow still lingered in distant threats, I refused to let it steal our light. For the first time in so long, I was living, not just surviving. And my children were learning what love was meant to be. But I didn't yet realize that my story was far from finished. Because freedom, as beautiful as it is, comes with battles you never expect. The months that followed were a mixture of victories and challenges. Life was no fairy tale, bills piled up, childcare was a constant juggling act, and exhaustion often weighed on me heavier than I thought I could bear. Yet even in the hardest moments, there was a quiet sense of triumph. Each morning when I woke up and saw my children safe beside me, I knew it was worth it. Freedom was not a single moment. It was a series of choices I had to make every day. To stay gone. To keep walking forward, even when fear whispered that I should look back. Daniel still tried to reach me. Letters came, slipped into Emily's mailbox with no return address. They were filled with apologies that felt hollow, mixed with anger that revealed his true self. Sometimes he promised he had changed, other times he reminded me how much I had ruined his life. I read the first few, my hands trembling, but soon I stopped opening them. The past was not my responsibility anymore. One day, after work at the bakery, I stayed late to help clean. The owner, Mr. Lawson, a kind older man, watched me scrubbing the counters with more determination than necessary. He asked gently, "Margaret, why do you always work like the world depends on it?" I froze. Then, for the first time, I told someone outside of family the truth. Not every detail, but enough. Enough for him to understand why I clung so desperately to this new life. He didn't say much, just patted my shoulder and said, "You're stronger than you think. Don't ever forget that." Those words stayed with me. Stronger than I think. Could it be true? As months turned into a year, I began to see it. Strength, not in grand gestures, but in the small everyday things. In walking my children to school, their laughter echoing on the street. In counting the coins of my paycheck, and realizing we had enough to get by. In watching my daughter draw pictures of smiling families and noticing how the father figure had disappeared from her paper without sadness, only acceptance. The healing was not only for them, it was for me, too. For so long, I had believed Daniel's voice. That I was weak. That I couldn't survive without him. That silence was my only option. But now, each day proved him wrong. There were moments of doubt, of course. Nights when loneliness crept in, whispering that I had traded one prison for another. Days when the weight of being both mother and provider felt crushing. Yet, unlike before, these struggles did not silence me. They pushed me to reach out, for help, for connection, for hope. I joined a support group for women who had left abusive relationships. The first time I walked into the room, I was terrified. But as I listened to their stories, I felt an overwhelming sense of recognition. Different faces, different lives, but the same pain, the same survival. We weren't broken, we were rebuilding. Together. It was in those meetings that I found my voice again. I shared pieces of my story, my hands shaking at first, then steadying as the words poured out. With each telling, I felt lighter, as though the past no longer had complete control over me. And then came the day when I realized I was no longer just surviving, I was living. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. I was walking home from work, the sky painted in shades of gold and pink. My children ran ahead, chasing each other down the sidewalk. Their laughter rang through the air, pure and unburdened. I stopped and watched them, my heart swelling. In that moment, I saw what freedom truly looked like. It wasn't just leaving Daniel, it was this. A life where laughter was louder than fear. A life where my children could be children, and I could finally breathe. That night, as we sat together eating dinner, I realized something else. For years, I had defined myself as what Daniel said I was. A wife. A prisoner. A shadow. But now, I was discovering who I really was. I was a mother, yes. But I was also a provider, a friend, a woman capable of starting over. I was proof that even the deepest wounds could heal. One evening, months later, Emily asked me a question I had never considered. Margaret, she said gently, what do you want for yourself now? Not for the kids, not for survival, for you. The question stunned me. What did I want? For so long, my life had been about escaping, protecting, enduring. But now I had choices. Slowly, I began to dream again. I enrolled in night classes, determined to build a future beyond the bakery. I studied late into the night after the children were asleep, exhausted but exhilarated. Each lesson, each exam, was a step toward a version of myself I had once thought impossible. The children flourished, too. My daughter joined a drawing club at school, her art blossoming into color and creativity. My son discovered a love for science, spending hours building small projects out of scraps he found. Watching them grow, free from Daniel's shadow, filled me with pride so fierce it almost hurt. And though Daniel's presence still lingered in occasional attempts to reach us, I no longer trembled. His voice no longer had power over me. The fear was there, yes, but it was no longer my master. One evening, I stood at the window of our small apartment, looking out at the city lights. The children were asleep, the world was quiet, and for the first time in so long, I felt peace. I whispered to myself, you did it. You made it out. You're free. But it wasn't just about being free from Daniel. It was about being free to live, to choose, to dream. And that's the message I want to leave behind, not just for myself, but for anyone who has ever felt trapped in silence. You are stronger than you think. You are braver than you believe. And no matter how dark the night may feel, there is always a dawn waiting. My story didn't end when I left Daniel. It began. And each day since then has been proof that healing is possible, that love can be reborn, that life can be rebuilt. I no longer look back in fear. I look forward, with hope, with strength, and with the certainty that I will never again live in the shadows of silence. Because now, my life is my own.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.